Right, hello, and I'm back with some more from Dr. Dave Regis's suggested opening repertoire. And in the last video, we looked at 4 games where Black uses the Tartakover system, which involves putting pieces roughly where I'm indicating now, and eventually probably playing c5, maybe playing e6 if you want to defend this square, possibly knight e4, this kind of thing. And you can almost do the same moves every time, unless white does something pretty sort of different, pretty challenging. And you can play basically this setup against anything that white plays, near enough anything white plays as a first move, except e4. It doesn't work against that because you would immediately be running into the Scandinavian completely different defense. But against d4, c4, knight c3, knight f3, g3, you name it, you can use this setup. So we're going to see some more games with it played, and very little to comment on in the openings of these games, because with these kinds of safe system openings, it tends not to be too much in the way of fireworks until we get to the middle game. So we've got 4 games that are all around the 20 move mark, a couple a bit quicker, a couple a bit slower, but roughly speaking. And our first one is Karapetian against Rook Hudson. 2 players I don't know, but it's the Georgian under-16 championship in Tbilisi in 2001. Dr. Davis excelled himself by yet again finding a game that you just would never think to look at. So let's see how this went. So d4, d5, c4. Just bear in mind, if you're watching the last video, you can still use the Tartakover system against pretty much anything white does. Just bear in mind, if you get a bishop here and a knight here, you might want to be careful of this square with white targeting this. So maybe play a6 to stop a knight going there. But look, the point is you can still basically play the same system. Anyway, in this game, typical Queen's Gambit. Yeah, Black can take the pawn. We discussed that briefly last time. If you take the pawn as Black, just don't try too hard to hold on to it. Just develop your pieces and you'll be fine. But it's a totally different opening system to the one we're playing, which is e6. So Queen's Gambit declined. Knight c3 from white, bishop e7 Black, knight f3, knight f6, bishop g5, and we kick the bishop with h6. So the bishop now has a choice. It can't stay there. It either has to retreat somewhere or take the knight. And generally, white usually plays bishop h4, but if they do take the knight and you just take back, you're perfectly happy with life. Nothing wrong with that. Castles from Black, e3 from white to release the bishop. b6 from Black from our opening system. So we're going to put our bishop here. And we saw in the previous video that can, not like that, because that's obviously cheating. But on this diagonal, that can be a really strong piece. Rook to c1 from white, bishop to b7 from Black. Remember, this rook might be nasty down here once we swap the pawns off. And certainly that's what white hopes, because in this game, pawn takes pawn. And we saw in the last video, knight takes or pawn takes are both okay. I don't think I'd probably want to play bishop takes, because after knight takes bishop, you've lost quite a strong piece and you might have some problems on your light squares over on the queen side. But it's probably not awful. But I think we're going to look at knight takes and pawn takes as being the best moves. In this game, knight takes, takes bishop, queen takes, and bishop to d3. Black's got 1 piece left to develop, really. There it is, the knight. Knight takes knight. And here, in this situation, computer's saying it quite likes the white position, but it's only +1. It's less than +1. It's not horrendous. It's gone down to +8 now. It's +0.8. It's not too bad. Black plays bishop takes. So again, okay, tiny advantage to white. Nothing too spectacular, I guess, just because of the slightly bigger center and this rook having this nice line. But let's see where the game carries on. Rook takes c7. It does look like white may have won a pawn. Bishop takes from Black. Pawn takes from white. Queen to d6 and queen to c2. So on the face of it, it rather looks as though white's won material. And yet the computer's saying 0.00. It does look, doesn't it, as though white's got an extra pawn. There's 7 white pawns, 6 black pawns. White's the rook is protected. Well, what's the problem? I didn't highlight that square on purpose. It was a misclick. So if you want to work out here the best move for black, that's quite crafty, but it doesn't win the game. What's the best move for black? Feel free. Otherwise, I will just play it in 3, 2, and 1. And it's actually this, because now the rook has no escape. It's attacked. We've cut off the defense of the queen by putting the knight in the way. And there's no safe squares for the rook to go to. Look. But the game isn't lost for white by any stretch of the imagination. They were a pawn up, so they just swap the rook for, the rook for the knight. Okay, pawn takes, and queen takes, and queen takes, and pawn takes. But by now, what little advantage there is has switched to black. We're looking at -1, so a little bit of an advantage for black. Rook A to B8, so we've got the advantage of the exchange, a rook against bishop, so definitely an advantage. White has to do something about this pawn. Oops, my arrows have gone funny. Has to do something about this pawn, so B3. So it's now defended. And now the other rook comes across and hits this pawn. And you've kind of got to ask, how are you going to defend this now? You can't. It's under attack and there's no way to defend it. The only way you could do it would be to go here, but then the rook, oh dear, I've totally lost the use of my arrows in this game, simply takes this one instead. So white is pretty much doomed here. In the game, rook G1 was played, rook C5, and white actually resigned here. I would suggest that at junior levels, intermediate levels even, you probably shouldn't resign here, because you might be able to put the bishop onto this square and completely glue it in. I think there's probably enough here that you could fight on a little bit for white and put up some resistance. But in this particular game, white just resigned. So not a spectacular tactical win, but a nice example of how this system can sort of get you into a bit of bother if you're playing white if you're not careful. Of course, the same applies for playing black if you're not careful. Just going back to this position here, after bishop d3, computer's saying completely level. It then didn't particularly like the move knight to d7. So I just want to see for you what it thinks is best. And it's recommending 3 different moves. Not a surprise that rook c8 is here, because we'll often want to play c5 in this opening. It's actually saying c5 straight away is okay. Knight takes c3 is okay, and it's even now offered rook to d8. So all sorts of things that black can play, but computer not a fan of this because it drops this pawn. It's a bit of a mistake, and because it's cut off the defense of the queen to this pawn. So after knight takes knight, and well, it says bishop takes, but pawn takes, whichever you do, it doesn't matter. Let's go with bishop takes because that was in the game. You do lose this pawn. And so there is now a slight advantage to white, but it's not earth-shattering. And as you've seen, there's still plenty of chances for white to mess up. But yeah, worth noting that in this position, you should be playing not the obvious knight to d7 because it unprotects this pawn. Okay. Let's get a new board and look at our second game. And we're in Linares in Spain, 2005. Ortega Ruiz against Casa. So white's 19th move in this appears to be a huge blunder. So let's play the moves and then get through to that 19th move and see what goes on. So d4, d5, c4, e6, and let's turn the lines off. We don't need them yet. Knight c3, knight f6. Bishop to g5. Again, if you saw the previous video, I did say this could be annoying, potentially, but you've got ways to deal with it. You can either put a pawn here and then the knight can't go there in the first place. That's okay. Or you can play here, but the trouble is then you've changed to what's called the Slav Defense. So, okay. But it's not anything that you need to be scared about here particularly. There's things you can do. You could probably even play bishop to b4, pin the knight. So if bishop to b4, pinning the knight, the queen might come out and check. forking the queen and the king, but then you can put the knight here. I suspect that's okay, but the point is you don't have to be scared of bishop f4 if you see it. But anyway, bishop to g5 is played, the standard move. Bishop to e7, e3, castles, knight to f3, and now h6. So asking a question of the bishop, and as I've said, bishop takes, we're fine with as black, but in the game, bishop h4, b6, as we've got to put this bishop somewhere, and now white takes, which is odd, really. You'd think if you were going to take, you'd have done it a couple of moves ago instead of wasting time moving back just to go forwards again. But that's what happens. Bishop takes, c takes d5, and e takes d5. Bishop e2, white just wants to get castle to get the bishop out of the way. Bishop to e6, and there's castles. Knight to d7. This time, remember, the last game that was a problem, but this time there's no rook there and this pawn's safe anyway, so it's no big deal. Bishop to b5. On the face of it, it looks as though white's wasted moves here because they've moved the bishop once, then twice. This one got here, then went back, then went forward again. Feels to me like white's wasting too many bishop moves, but having said that, the position is still level, so what do I know? And then slightly bizarrely, black put the knight back again. Okay, fair enough. Well, I suppose you've got to ask, where's it going to go? But this is a strange move. All right. Queen a4 from white. Queen d6 black. Rook f to d1 from white. c6. So now we've asked the question of this bishop, where's it going to go? And it goes all the way back again. Bishop to e2. Bishop f5 from white. Rook a c1. That will happen a lot. Is the rook on this open file or half open file. Knight back to d7. b4 from white. So again, an attempt to stop this move, really, apart from anything else, an attempt to stop this move, but position's basically dead level. b5 from black. Now, sometimes I'd criticize this because this pawn looks horribly backward. I mean, it's never going to be able to advance, is it? But I suspect here it's not a huge problem because a knight could find its way to there and just block anything. But we don't get to that stage in this game. The white queen's been attacked and she moves to a6. The knight comes to b6, as I suspected it might, the possibility of going there. And this position is pretty level. Computer says that maybe the most minuscule edge to black, basically level. And then white plays the next move. And this is not very good. It's kind of losing all the escape squares for the queen. Where's she going to go? She's running out of squares. She's not trapped yet, but she's running out of squares. And in the game, bishop to c8 was played. Queen to a4 was played. Knight to c4 was played. And white actually resigned at this point, which is interesting. Why? Well, after bishop here, bishop to here, what exactly are you going to be able to do with the queen? And I think this is why white resigned, but there is some play left. You can try knight takes. So instead of defending your own queen, you simply attack the black queen. And black has to go somewhere. So the computer's saying queen e7, fine. And now there's all kinds of white pieces under attack. Look at this. 3 different pieces under attack. Computer says your best bet's bishop takes. Why are we not taking the queen? Well, we are taking the queen. Bishop takes c6. Just following through the main moves. Bishop to b7 because, yeah, is good. Bishop takes, queen takes, and I assume pawn takes bishop. Yeah, and this is kind of where you'd end up. And slight advantage black. I don't think it's enough that maybe white should have resigned in the game, but it's possible that they just didn't notice this move when they thought their queen was going to get trapped. So I suspect in this position, they just thought that there was no way to save the queen and overlooked knight takes b5. But even so, that last position that we just looked at, it wasn't terribly pretty for white, was it, with black having the extra queen, even if it was only -1. So yeah, okay, interesting game. And once again, you can see for yourself, the Tartakover system is pretty solid. Okay, let's do our next one. We've got 2 more to go, and we're in Groningen for the Under-20 European Championship qualifiers, no less, in the year 1973. And we've got Pisani Bencini against Anselmo. Okay, fair enough. So d4. Oh, let's put the board the other way around. Turn the lines off. Knight to f6. c4. e6. Knight c3. d5. And we've got our setup just by a slightly different move order. Bishop to g5. Bishop to e7. Knight to f3. Castles. e3. h6. Bishop drops back. b6. Bishop to e2. Bishop to b7. Castles. Knight b to d7. Rook c1. c5. h3. Rook to c8. And I think it's fair to say that we've ended the opening phase of the game about as level can be. The computer's saying minus 0.1. Yeah, I mean, you could get more level than that, but this is basically a dead level game. But there's still play to go. So our next move from white was b3. C takes d4 from black. Knight takes d4. And knight to c5. Nothing dramatic at the moment. C d5, knight d5. So all these 4 pawns that were here a couple of moments ago have cleared and have almost been perfectly replaced with knights. Move 15 for white. Bishop takes e7. Queen takes e7. Lots and lots of exchanges. Knight takes d5. Bishop takes d5. White wants more exchanges. Bishop to f3. At this point, black doesn't oblige. Black plays something different. Knight to e4. Rook to c2. Rook to c5. Queen to d3. Queen to b7. Rook f to c1. Rook f to c8. And we have what on the face of it is still, and has been since all near enough sort of move 1, a perfectly level, equal chances position. Yeah, you've got the 4 rooks staring at each other down the open file. Wonder who will blink first. But you've got completely, or near enough, completely symmetrical pawn formations. 4 versus 4 on one side. 2 versus 2 on the other. Bishop, bishop, knight, knight. It's just really, really level. And then white plays this move. And Dr. Dave's comment in his book about this just awful blunder is not sure what made white do that. No, absolutely. Now, clearly white could have done just about anything except that and would still be winning. But if you want to press pause at this point and work out why that move is such a disaster, then feel free. Otherwise, I will show you in 3, 2, and 1. And quite simply, knight takes f2, which is check. So white's going to have to deal with the check, but also attacks the queen. And well, you know, if you play a king move, you just lose your queen. So that's not going to do it. So you're really going to have to take the knight. And rook takes knight is simply not going to do it because rook takes rook. And black has just won the exchange. Black's won a rook for a knight and various other things as well. It is, look at the domination on this open file all of a sudden. From having 4 rooks staring at each other, black completely owns it. So yeah, really, really just a strange blunder from white when playing king h1. But I mean, this game absolutely level all the way through. If you ever wanted an advert for why the Tartakover system is so safe and solid for black to play, this game will be it. Right up to the point where white just has a disaster. Okay, we have one more, and then we can leave this behind us and move on to Dr. Dave's final suggestion in the next video for black. And what have we got here? We've got Bessier against Sonberger in the Austrian Championship of May 1999. Okay, so same again, we're just going to get to the final position because it's a system opening, so there's not much to say. D4, D5, C4, E6, knight C3, bishop, oh, excuse me, I dropped the bishop then, I touched the mouse but missed. Knight to F3, knight to F6, bishop to G5 and H6, bishop to H4, castles, E3, B6, bishop to D3, bishop to B7, queen to C2, and an early pawn takes from black. Nothing wrong with this, absolutely reasonable move. I mean, white's already moved the bishop once, so why not make white waste a move by having to move it a second time to capture? And black's going to play C5 anyway, and they do. And this is dead level once again here, plus 0.1, it's level. And then white plays castles queenside. Now remember, I'm doing these games live. I'm basically reading the book and playing the moves and commentating as we go. And my chess brain tells me that that's a really odd side to castle because one of the pawns is missing. This is going to go, and then maybe black will put a rook here. It just feels like that's a slightly odd side for white to castle. But that's just instinct. I mean, the computer says minus 0.4, so okay, it's still level, whatever. Pawn takes from black, knight takes from white, queen to C8, so attacking this bishop, queen to B3 defending it, and knight to C6. I have to say the computer's not a big fan of that. Look, it's gone to -1, but that's still not a total disaster. Knight to C6 is played. Knight takes, bishop takes, king to B1, and queen to B7. I guess the reason black didn't take this pawn straight away is because if the rook moves across, suddenly you would have a problem because you'd have an open line pointing directly at your king with a rook there. And I guess with that looks like a pretty unpleasant crossfire. So my guess is that's probably why black didn't take the pawn straight away. So then move 16 now, white finally stops any of this stuff going over here. So these two pawns now defend each other. So F3 was played. Rook A to D8, so challenging for the open file, and E4, and tempting to blunt this bishop completely, I guess. Computer still isn't a big fan of the white position, minus 1.4, okay. But it looks okay for both sides, nothing to worry about. And then black unleashes something quite interesting. Knight takes E4. This is an interesting one. Now, if white plays pawn takes knight, you just bishop takes bishop and you've just won a pawn, and black's very happy with life. So that's not quite going to do it. So what happens instead is white plays bishop takes here, and black needs another move. So knight takes knight check. So it's gaining time. White has to deal with a check. Queen takes c3. And now black has time to play queen takes e7. So the upshot of all that is black has won a pawn. Here it is. If you look at the rest of the position, this pawn that I'm flashing the square of is a straight pawn profit and minus 1.4. Yeah, black is happy with life. But he's still got to prove it. It's only one pawn. Rook to c1, rook to c8, and bishop to a6 in this position from white, attacking the rook. But now you've just seen the bar has shot north. What is it that's the problem in this position? Press pause if you want to try to find the correct next move for black. Otherwise, I will show you what they should play to make white resign in 3, 2, and 1. And the point is, you've now got this rook facing the enemy queen. How are we going to take advantage of this? Can we take advantage of this? Well, yes. Bishop to e4 is check. Of course, because it's check, the white king is in danger and they must deal with the check. Pawn takes bishop, rook takes queen, rook takes rook, and black is very happy with life here. You're what? Let's look at the material. Queen against rook and bishop, queen and 2 pawns against rook and bishop. So you're looking at 11 points of material. Sorry, queen and 1 pawn. Yeah, 10 points of material. No, I was right first time. Yeah, queen and a pawn against rook and bishop. Yeah, your 2 points of material up. Sorry, I was just miscounting in my head. And with a very happy position. So in that tournament game, white resigned. So, okay, that was our solid opening, the Tartakover system. I'm just going to put the setup back on and flip the board. So remember, against anything except e4, you can't play it against e4, but oops, of course, because I'm on setup, I've changed the color of the pawn by mistake. But against anything except e4, what you should be doing is d5, e6, knight f6, bishop e7, h6 if you want to pester this bishop, it's probably a good idea. b7, bishop b7, sorry, that's b6, I said b7, bishop to b7, knight b to d7, get castled, and then you're going to start maybe moving pawns this way, possibly advancing like that. If you don't want a white piece to land here, you're certainly going to play a6. You're probably going to put one or other of your rooks onto c8, or maybe this rook will end up on d8, so you've got nice centralized rooks, and play the game from there. Very safe, very solid way to get to the middle game. It doesn't put huge pressure on white. It's not like they've suddenly got to work out hundreds and hundreds of tactics really, really early. So it's not as complicated as the Tarrasch setup that we looked at, but it's very solid and very safe, very easy to learn. Just remember that piece setup against anything except e4. As long as white hasn't played e4, this piece setup should get you a pretty good game against just about anything. Okay, I will be back soon with 2 short videos on Dr. Dave's 3rd recommendation for playing again as black, and I'll see you then for that next time. Thanks for watching.